My name is Joanna Keene, and I was always the extra pair of hands, never the heir. But the day I stood at my brother's wedding, raised a glass to the guests, and announced that I, not my brother, was leaving the family farm behind to run a $1 million agtech startup, I watched my father's pride curdle into fury as his legacy crumbled. Where are you watching from? Drop your state or country in the comments. I want to know where strong women live. It was a blistering July afternoon, the kind where even the flies seemed too tired to buzz. I was 14, sunburned across my shoulders, sweat soaking through the back of my faded t-shirt as I heaved hay into the barn. The air smelled like dust, manure, and something older like resignation. Our farm in western Kentucky had a way of swallowing sound, hope, and time all at once. "Joanna," my father barked from across the yard, shielding his eyes from the sun with a leathery hand. "You stacked that crooked. Redo the whole corner." I bit down on my bottom lip so hard I tasted metal. The stack was fine. Even if it wasn't, I'd been at it since dawn while Wade, my older brother by 3 years, had disappeared after breakfast claiming he had errands. Just then, a loud rumble announced Wade's return. He pulled into the drive behind the house, dust curling up around thick new tires. The truck gleamed, a metallic red beast with chrome trim and fresh dealer plates. He slammed the door, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Check it out," he called, swaggering toward the barn. "Got it with Dad's bonus." I blinked. Dad's bonus, the same bonus I'd heard him talking about 2 weeks ago when Mom thought I was asleep, the one he said would help us get through the dry season. Wade tossed me a smirk. "Try not to scratch it with your pitchfork, Joe." I dropped the fork, hard. "Wait, you got the truck, from Dad's bonus?" He shrugged, proud as ever. He said I've earned it. "Earned it?" I choked out a laugh. "You haven't lifted a finger on this farm all summer. I'm the one feeding the livestock, fixing the gates." Our father appeared beside us like thunder. Rick Keene, broad-shouldered, sun-hardened, and silent until he was. "Enough." His voice was dry and flinty. "Wade's been helping out at the co-op, making connections, that's worth something." I stepped forward, barely believing I had to ask. "Do I get anything for helping? I've been doing this every day. For years." His face didn't flinch. "You're a girl, you help because you care, it's different." And there it was, like a slap made out of syllables. I felt the heat rise to my face, but it wasn't sunburn anymore, it was fury, thick and slow. My voice was barely a whisper, but I meant every syllable. "I'll never ask again." Wade scoffed, climbing into his shiny new seat. "You'll thank him one day." Dad turned on his heel and walked off, like I'd just asked about the weather. Like I hadn't just cracked something between us that could never be uncracked. I went back to the barn and picked up the pitchfork again, but not before I glanced over my shoulder at that truck. The paint caught the sun, flashy and smug. One day I thought, I'll park something right next to that. Not chrome and horsepower. Something that runs on code and vision. Something no one gave me because no one ever did. That was the first time I tasted the rust of injustice. Not the last. But it was the moment I stopped waiting for anyone on this farm to hand me anything. It was also the day I started planning my escape, quietly, fiercely, and forever. 14 years passed, but the farm stayed the same. The sun still rose over the same cracked fence posts. The air still smelled like alfalfa and early frost. The barn leaned just a little more than it had the year before, and the tools still hung from the same rusted nails inside. Except now, I wasn't a teenager with a pitchfork. I was a woman with calloused hands, mud on her boots, and a growing secret coded between midnight hours. By day, I still shoveled, repaired, fed, and hauled like any other farmhand. Rick wouldn't have it any other way. He liked things where he could see them: cattle, hay, hard labor. Not screens and nonsense. He'd never used a smartphone. Still drove the same truck he'd bought secondhand when I graduated high school. But by night, God, those nights, I built something bigger than this land ever gave me. CropSync started as a personal spreadsheet when the barn ledger kept falling apart in my hands. Then it became a simple app I coded in the back of the hardware store's loading dock during my seasonal gig. And now it was a digital crop inventory and supply chain tracking tool that 3 co-ops in neighboring counties had quietly begun to pay for. And they didn't even know I was the one behind it. I'd registered the LLC under JK Agritech, kept the taxes clean, rented a PO box in town, paid a friend from college, Lena, now a marketing lead in Chicago, to handle customer service emails under an alias. I couldn't risk Rick or Wade finding out. Not yet. Not until it was too real to kill. My room upstairs in the farmhouse still had the wallpaper with little sunflowers. I'd strung a blackout curtain across the window and covered the walls with whiteboards, sketches of system flows, to-do lists, feature notes. The old wooden desk once belonged to my grandfather. Now it held a dual-monitor setup I'd paid for in cash. I coded with headphones on while the rest of the house slept. That was the only time the farm felt like mine. It was a Tuesday morning when the tension returned in its quiet, familiar way. I came downstairs after logging 3 hours of work on the app's new harvest forecasting module. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and Folgers. Rick sat at the head of the table with the newspaper folded into thirds. Wade was already halfway through his eggs. "Joe, grab a plate," Rick said without looking up. "Wade's got news." I slid into the chair across from him, brushing hay off my sleeve. "What kind of news?" Wade wiped his mouth with a paper napkin, smirking like he had at 16. "Got promoted. Lead accounts at the co-op now. I'll be managing supplier contracts starting this quarter." Rick grunted proudly. "Told you that boy knows how to talk to people. That's how you move forward." "Congrats," I said, offering Wade a small nod. He barely glanced at me. Rick set his coffee down with a heavy thunk. "He's the one bringing something to the table. Might be time we start talking succession planning, huh?" I stiffened. "Succession?" Rick finally looked at me. "You know what I mean. This land doesn't run itself. Wade's proven, steady, got vision." "Vision?" I echoed, heart pounding against my ribs. "You mean spreadsheets and checking grain prices?" "He's where the future's headed," Rick said, completely missing the irony. "You're just helping out." There it was again, helping out, not contributing, not carrying, not building. I gripped the edge of the table, feeling that old heat rise up again, but this time it didn't boil. It settled into something cooler. Focused. I hit fire flickering just beneath my collarbone. "Right," I murmured, "just helping." Rick grunted, satisfied that the topic was closed. "Wade's got that natural leader thing. Some folks are just built for it." Wade shoved the last piece of toast into his mouth and stood up. "Got ahead in early. Contracts wait for no man." "Proud of you, son," Rick called after him. Then to me, "Don't forget to restack that feed order in the barn. Some of the sacks tore open again." I nodded slowly. "Sure. I'll take care of it." Later that night, I pushed the last broken feed sack into the corner of the barn, hands blistered, jeans covered in dust, and climbed the stairs back to my little upstairs command center. My fingers flew over the keyboard until 2:47 a.m., adjusting the pricing algorithm based on new USDA forecasts. One of my pilot clients had already doubled their monthly tier. The app was growing. Quietly, steadily, like roots beneath the soil. And one day, the whole field would split open because of it. I saved my code, turned off the monitors, and whispered into the dark room. "I'm not just helping." It was a Thursday night. The kind that smelled like fried chicken and wood polish, and carried the weight of something unspoken. I'd just come in from clearing out a busted irrigation pipe near the lower field, mud still drying on my jeans when I heard laughter from the kitchen. Wade's laugh, low and smug, followed by my father's hearty chuckle and my mother's excited clapping. Something was up. I walked in and instantly felt the shift. Mom had the good plates out. The meat was still steaming, but no one was eating. Wade stood at the head of the table, grinning like a politician. "Joe," Mom said, cheeks flushed. "You're just in time, Wade has news." I slid into my usual seat, hands still raw from gripping pipe clamps all afternoon. "Yeah, what kind of news?" Wade rested one hand on the back of Megan's chair. Megan Harper, his girlfriend of a year and a half. Local girl, sweet, studied ag business 2 counties over. She had a warmth about her that made it hard not to like her, even if I tried. "We're getting married," Wade announced. There it was. The room burst like a pinata, voices, silverware clinking, Mom's hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Wade," she beamed, standing to hug him. "When, where?" "We're looking at mid-June," Megan said softly. "Maybe here on the farm." Rick slapped the table with pride. "Knew it was common. Told your mother this boy doesn't wait around when he knows something's right." I stared at my plate. Mashed potatoes cooling in silence, a knot slowly tightening in my chest. "Joanna," Mom asked, "aren't you gonna say something?" I looked up. Megan was smiling at me, tentative. Wade had his arm around her, proud like he'd invented the concept of commitment. "Congratulations," I said. "Really?" Megan reached across the table. "We'd love for you to be there, of course." I nodded, "Of course." Then Rick cleared his throat. And just so it's said plain, we expect you there, Joanna, no excuses. Family stands together at milestones or you're no daughter of mine. The room went quiet save for the hum of the fridge. I didn't look at him. Didn't look at Wade or Megan. Just kept my eyes on the gravy pooling on my plate. Because I couldn't say it, not here, not now, that the wedding date landed the exact same weekend as my pitch meeting in San Francisco. Not just any pitch, either. A final round with an agtech investment group that could fund CropSync's expansion into 5 states. The meeting I'd been prepping for over 6 months. The kind of opportunity you don't reschedule, but I stayed silent. My fork moved slowly through the potatoes, though I couldn't taste them. "Did you hear me?" Rick asked again, voice sharper now. "I heard you," I said quietly. He grunted. "Good, I don't want drama, not on your brother's big day." Mom, trying to smooth it over, chimed in. "And maybe Joanna can help with the flowers, she always was the crafty one," Wade chuckled. "Yeah, you've got the time, right?" I forced a smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. Megan looked at me gently. "We'd really love to have you involved. But only if you want to." Her words hung in the air like a softer note in a symphony of assumptions. Because no one at that table, not even Megan, kind as she was, could imagine I had anything more pressing to do. They didn't see the app, the revenue charts, the inbox full of beta requests. To them I was still the girl in the barn, pitchfork in hand, showing up because I cared. I wondered what would happen if I opened my laptop right there on the table. Showed them the dashboard, the market interest, the wait list. But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the words whole, like dry bread in my throat. Later, after the congratulations had mellowed into plans and to-do lists, I stood by the kitchen sink washing dishes, the hum of their chatter echoing behind me. "Think you can make time to hem Megan's dress if it needs adjusting?" Mom asked. "Sure," I said, "whatever's needed." Because that's who I was to them. Needed, helpful, always available. And because I hadn't told them otherwise. Not yet. The morning of Wade's wedding dawned thick with heat and cicadas. The kind of morning that clung to your skin and made your hair stick to the back of your neck before you even stepped outside. I sat alone in my upstairs room, blinds drawn, phone screen glowing in my lap. My finger hovered over the email marked San Francisco pitch confirmation, final round. The message had been sitting there for days, blinking like a warning light. The flight was supposed to leave in 3 hours, but I hadn't packed. Not because I didn't want to go, but because, somehow, I already knew I wasn't going. Not this time. I can't explain it in numbers or logic. I've always been that kind of woman, measured, strategic, quietly calculated. But that morning I looked out at the barn, at the rows of folding chairs being set up between the walnut trees, at my father's shape moving between the shadows, commanding, correcting, controlling, and I realized this was the moment I had to witness for myself. Not for Wade. Not for Rick, for me, for proof. I slipped on my oldest pair of boots and a clean sundress I hadn't worn since high school. It still fit, even if my life had long outgrown it. I tied my hair back in a low knot, skipped makeup, and walked down the stairs like I'd just come back from the store. No one saw me. They were all at the venue already. It wasn't far, just beyond the north pasture, a clearing we used for family reunions and bonfires, now transformed with white fabric draped between trees and mason jars hung from branches like glowing fruit. The ceremony had already begun. I stood in the shade behind a pine tree, out of sight but not out of earshot. Megan was walking down the aisle, her father clutching her arm, Wade waiting under the arch like some smug boy king. Rick stood just behind him, puffed up with pride, chin high, already imagining the toast he'd give about legacy and land and sons who carried the torch. I stayed back, waiting for the applause, the kiss, the swell of music. Then quietly I stepped out of the trees and started walking, boots crunching on dry leaves, heads turning. The reception had already begun, people fanning themselves under rented tents, drinks sweating on plastic tables. Conversations froze as I crossed the edge of the yard. Rick spotted me first, his jaw tensed. "Well, look who crawled back," he muttered to Wade, loud enough for me to hear. Wade didn't turn around. He was too busy accepting congratulations and back pats like a local celebrity. I kept walking. Then before anyone else could speak, Megan turned, eyes wide. For a split second I braced for discomfort. A polite smile, awkward nod. But instead she beamed. "Oh my God, you came." She rushed over, lifting the hem of her dress to keep from tripping, arms open before I even said a word. I blinked. I wasn't sure I'd be welcome. Your family, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like lavender and sincerity. And, I've heard so much, thank you for coming. I swallowed the knot in my throat. Congratulations, you look amazing. She leaned in close, lowering her voice just enough. Also, she whispered, I know about Crop Sync. I froze, she winked. Small world. My cousin's farm in Franklin signed up last month. They're obsessed with it, said it's revolutionizing their inventory tracking. I blinked again, caught completely off guard. Wait, how did you? Your initials are on the pat footer. I'm not dumb, she said, laughing softly. I started connecting dots. You're smarter than all of us, Joanna. I stared at her, something inside me softening just enough to crack open. I'm not trying to make a scene, I said. You're not, she replied. You just showed up. That's more than most people ever do. She took my hand and led me toward the drink table like it was the most natural thing in the world. Rick didn't speak to me, not yet, but he watched. His eyes followed me across the clearing, jaw tight, fingers clenched around his styrofoam cup. He saw that Megan welcomed me. That other guests, distant cousins, neighbors nodded as I passed. That I didn't slink in like some guilty outsider, but walked like someone who chose to be here, not someone begging for a seat. I hadn't come to fight, I'd come to be seen. And that, more than anything, seemed to rattle him. Later, I found a spot near the edge of the dance floor, half listening to the band tune their instruments. Megan drifted over again, drink in hand. If you ever want to talk shop, she said, I've got some ideas. Been thinking about automation workflows since ag school. I smiled, I'd like that. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just helping out. I was standing beside someone who saw me. And something in me shifted. The sun was starting its slow descent over the hills when I finally caught Wade alone, leaning against one of the porch beams with a glass of bourbon and a look that was, for once, more thoughtful than smug. Guests were scattered across the patio, some deep in conversation, others drowsy from wine and heat. Megan had disappeared somewhere with her college friends, and Rick was holding court by the grill, reliving the old days to anyone who'd listen. I walked up quietly. Wade didn't notice me until I was a few feet away. Don't worry, he said without turning. Dad already made 3 people cry in his toast, and the dancing hasn't even started. I gave a small smile. Sounds about right. He glanced over. Didn't expect to see you here, Joe. I know, I said. Then I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out the small, weathered box I'd kept since I was 17. Here, I handed it to him. I want you to have this. Wade frowned and took the box, opening it slowly. Inside, cushioned on faded velvet, was our grandfather's pocket watch, gold-plated Roman numerals, the hinge still smooth as ever, his brows lifted. Is this? Yeah, I said. It's Grandpa Hank S. He stared at it for a long moment. He promised this to you. I nodded. I know. Then why are you? Because, I said quietly, he would have wanted you to have it today. This is your day, Wade. You're stepping into something new. He'd have given it to you himself if he were here. Wade swallowed, jaw working like he didn't quite know what to say. Joe, he started, then stopped. You sure? I nodded again. I've been holding on to it a long time. But that doesn't mean it was meant to stay with me. He looked down at the watch again, flipping it over in his palm. I forgot how small his handwriting was, he murmured, reading the inscription to Hank for time well spent. We stood there in silence for a moment. The music from the speakers had shifted to something slow and nostalgic. Laughter rose from the far side of the patio. The air smelled like barbecue smoke and lilacs. Finally, Wade looked at me again, softer now. Less of the posturing. Thanks, he said. Really, you didn't have to do this. I shrugged, keeping my tone light. It's either this or a set of personalized his and hers coasters. He chuckled, then shook his head. You're still part of this, you know, even if you don't always feel like it. That surprised me. I mean, yeah, Dad gives you a hard time. And I know I have too, but you've been the spine of this place since you were, what, 12, 14? 14, I said, remembering the hay, the heat, the sting of his words all those years ago. Right, he said. I don't say it much, but I do notice. We all do. I searched his face for any sign of mockery. But there wasn't any. Just Wade, in a suit he didn't quite fit into, holding the only family heirloom that had ever meant something to me. I felt the lump in my throat before I could stop it. I looked away, blinking into the sunlight. He leaned against the beam again, sipping from his glass. Megan talks about you a lot, thinks you're the most interesting person in the family. Because I didn't get a truck when I turned 18. No, he said. Because you don't talk much, but when you do, it matters. I didn't reply. Not yet. I just let myself feel that, for maybe the first time, Wade saw me not as the girl in the background but as someone real. The moment passed quietly, no big swell of emotion, no dramatic hug. Just two siblings standing shoulder to shoulder on a cracked porch. And for now, that was enough. The reception was in full swing now. String lights flickering like fireflies overhead, the band playing something old and sweet, couples swaying under the canopy of walnut trees. I slipped away to the bar tucked near the edge of the dance floor, hoping for a few quiet minutes. The bartender, a retired neighbor who ran his own distillery, poured me a modest glass of sweet tea and added a wink. You look like you've seen some things today. I raised my glass in a silent toast and turned back toward the crowd. Then out of the corner of my eye I saw Megan. She approached slowly, her heels in one hand, bouquet in the other, the hem of her dress catching on the patio stones. Her hair had come undone in places, strands framing her flushed face. She looked not like a bride but like a girl who'd just climbed out of a fairy tale and wasn't sure what to do next. "Hey," she said softly, leaning one elbow on the bar. "Mind if I crash your moment of peace?" I smiled, scooting over. "Long day." "Long year," she joked, then signaled the bartender for a sparkling water. "But worth it." We sipped quietly for a beat before she nudged me gently. "You know, I've been curious about something." "Yeah." Megan tilted her head, studying me with that open, curious look she had. "What do you really do, Joanna? I mean, besides wrangle hay and fix things around the farm." I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to answer, but because it had been so long since anyone had asked me that with genuine curiosity and no agenda, so I told her the truth. "I run a startup," I said, watching her reaction. "It automates inventory and supply systems for small farms and ag co-ops. Crops Inc., that's the name," she blinked. "Crops Inc., as in wait," I nodded once. "Our farm just signed up for that last month," she said, eyes wide. "Through the co-op in Franklin. My dad called it that fancy tracking system. You're telling me that's yours?" "It is." "No way," she breathed, standing up straighter. "You're kidding." "I'm not." Megan stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Joanna, that's huge. Do Wade or your dad know?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Why not? That's amazing." I exhaled slowly, gaze drifting toward the pasture. "Because they don't see me that way. I'm the extra hands. The one who knows how to fix the irrigation lines and back up the grain truck. That's all I've ever been allowed to be." Megan was quiet for a moment, turning that over. "But they're wrong," she said finally. "You built something real, something better than what most of us could imagine. And you did it while pulling your weight here twice over." I didn't speak. Just watched the shimmer of light on her glass, the flicker of disbelief slowly turning to admiration in her face. "I should have known," she said, laughing a little. "The way you carry yourself, you don't talk much, but it's like there's a whole second life going on under the surface." "There is," I said, "and I've kept it quiet for a reason." "Rick," I nodded, she sighed. "He's proud of Wade, but it's narrow. His pride only stretches so far." I smiled faintly. "That's the nicest way I've ever heard anyone put it." Megan turned to face me more fully. "You know, when Wade talks about the farm, he talks about growing it. But when you talk about the future, just now I felt it, it's already happening. You're not talking about dreams, you're building something." That caught me off guard. I didn't expect to feel seen, especially not here. "Thanks," I said, voice quieter now. "That means more than you know." She bumped her glass gently against mine. "If you ever want help expanding, I've got a business degree and about 100 ideas. And now I guess I'm technically your sister-in-law." I laughed. "I'll think about it." Behind us, the music swelled and the crowd shifted toward the dance floor. But I didn't move. I stood still for a long moment, finishing the last sip of my tea, letting the warmth of Megan's words settle somewhere deep inside me. And for the first time since I'd built Crops Inc., I let myself imagine what it would feel like to stop hiding. Dinner was served under the tent, long folding tables, dressed up in white linen, and hand-tied burlap runners. Mason jars filled with sunflowers dotted the center, flickering tea lights casting soft golden halos across the guests' plates. I took my place toward the end, quiet like always. Megan had given me a warm smile as she passed to join the head table. Wade was there, front and center. Rick, of course, sat beside him. The servers brought out pulled pork, roasted vegetables, and peach cobbler in tiny mason jars. It was a farm wedding in every sense. Homegrown, hearty, and dripping in tradition. Rick was in his element. Fork in one hand, iced tea in the other, he held court again. "This land has been in the Keene family for 4 generations," he said, loud enough to rise above the low hum of conversation. "And now, with Wade stepping up, we've got the fifth in place. That boy knows how to run things, knows what it takes to keep a farm standing." People murmured their agreement, heads nodding, plates clinking. "And then we've got our little helper down there," he added, grinning like it was some fond joke. His eyes flicked to me. "Always the one patching fences and hauling buckets. Wouldn't be the same without her." I didn't move. I just looked down at the roast carrots on my plate, expression calm, but I felt my jaw tight. Little helper, it was said so easily. Like praise, like affection, like dismissal. Before I could speak, or even decide if I wanted to, Megan cleared her throat. "Actually," she said, turning toward Rick, her voice smooth but sharp, "I'd love to hear what Joanna's building." The table quieted. Megan smiled sweetly. "Her name's all over the AgTech journals, didn't you know?" Rick blinked mid-chew. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth. "You read AgTech journals?" he asked, trying for lightness. "I do," Megan said. "My dad subscribes to 2, and CropSync's been featured 3 times this quarter alone." A hush dropped over the table like a wool blanket. Across from me, someone set their fork down gently. Rick looked from Megan to me. "Crop what now?" I held his gaze for a moment, still unsure, but I didn't answer. "Not yet. Let the silence do the heavy lifting for once." Rick cleared his throat, face coloring slightly. "Well, sounds like another fancy app. Lot of folks trying to disrupt agriculture these days." "Maybe," Megan replied, her tone still polite. "But not many of them come from a real working farm, or run their own code, or balance livestock duties while building scalable infrastructure." She looked right at me then, and her smile softened. "Joanna does." I saw a flicker behind Rick's eyes, surprise, maybe even confusion, but he didn't speak. And for the first time, I didn't fill the silence either. I just let it settle, right there on the table between us. The sky had gone from soft gold to deep blue, and the band was tuning up for the first dance. Guests gathered near the dance floor, phones raised, eyes shiny from wine and sentiment. Wade stood waiting, hand outstretched, as Megan adjusted her dress and smiled at him like no one else existed. The MC tapped the mic to signal the next moment on the schedule. I wasn't on it, but I stepped forward anyway. I heard myself ask, "May I?" A simple request, offered to no one and everyone. The mic was handed over before anyone could question it. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. The words had been simmering inside me for too long, and now they rolled out, steady as a harvest wind. "I know this night is about Wade and Megan," I began, scanning the crowd, locking eyes with no one in particular and everyone all at once. "And I wouldn't dream of taking away from that. But I've got something to say, just this once, while all the people I've worked beside, grown up with, and broken my back for are in one place." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Wade furrowed his brow slightly, and Megan, still smiling, leaned forward as if to catch every word. I took a breath. "Tonight, I'm stepping down from the family farm," I said. The murmur was instant. I heard the air shift, felt Rick go still behind me like a tree caught midsway in a storm. "I've worked these fields since I was 14. I've shoveled and stacked, repaired and rebuilt. I've done it without pay, without recognition, because I thought that was loyalty. But in the quiet, in the hours after chores, I was building something else." I paused. CropSync, a software platform I created to help small farms like ours stay competitive. This month we passed $1 million in revenue, and starting Monday I'm going full-time. Megan gasped, then clapped. Loud, clear, alone at first. Then others joined in. Neighbors, a few cousins. People who had seen me, really seen me for years and hadn't known what I'd been carrying in secret. But not Rick. He stood frozen, face flushed, lips twitching with something far colder than pride. When I turned, he took a step forward. "You done?" he asked. The mic was still in my hand. He shook his head. "You think this is something to brag about? You built that under my roof, ate my food, lived on my land." "I earned my keep," I replied. "Mike still live." He sneered. "You're making a fool of yourself. All this tech nonsense, it's just numbers on a screen. You wouldn't have lasted a day without this place." Someone shifted uncomfortably in the back. Megan's mother whispered to her father. An uncle cleared his throat. Megan stood up again, voice raised. "None of that changes what she's done. CropSync is changing the game." Rick didn't look at her. "This family was built on land and labor," he barked, "not pride and microphones." A sharp silence followed. Some clapped again. Others stayed quiet, eyes darting between us. The split was sudden, visible, and I realized Rick wasn't just angry. He was scared, because for the first time I wasn't just the helper. I wasn't just the girl in the barn, I was the one walking away. On my terms. The music had quieted, the crowd had thinned. Somewhere in the distance, chairs were being folded and glassware gathered into crates, but the world near the koi pond felt suspended in time. That's where I ended up. Shoes off, toes grazing the damp edge of the rocks, I sat with my knees tucked to my chest. The fairy lights strung in the trees cast ripples of gold across the surface of the water, where pale orange koi circled in lazy loops, unbothered by the chaos of people and pride. The echo of Rick's voice still clung to the back of my mind. "You're making a fool of yourself." Maybe I had. I wasn't sure. I didn't regret the truth, but I regretted the setting. I hadn't meant to steal their moment. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. Footsteps crunched behind me, soft, careful, and then Megan's voice, gentle as dusk. "Mind if I sit?" I nodded, scooting over. She lowered herself beside me, tucking her dress carefully, her hair now falling in soft waves around her shoulders. A bobby pin hung from her fingers like a truce flag. "I should have waited," I said quietly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hijack your wedding." Megan didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out at the pond, her reflection shimmering just beside mine. "You didn't hijack anything," she said softly. "You made it honest." My throat tightened. It wasn't the time. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But it was the truth and everyone felt it." I glanced at her, expecting tension in her eyes. There was none. She turned to me and to my surprise her lashes were wet, her voice cracked just slightly. "No one else ever told your story before," she whispered. "Not like that, not out loud." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She gave a half laugh, wiping under her eyes. "I've sat at that table 100 times, listening to your dad talk about legacy, about Wade, about what makes someone worthy. I never realized how much of that weight you've carried, silently." "I wasn't trying to make anyone feel guilty." "You didn't," she cut in. "You made me feel proud." I stared at her, stunned. "I'm proud to marry into this family," Megan said, voice steady now, "but today you're the one I look up to." The words landed somewhere deep in my chest. We sat there, two women in the dark, sharing a silence that didn't feel empty anymore. Eventually, she smiled. "When I walked down the aisle, I felt brave, but when you picked up that mic, that was something else." "I was terrified," I confessed. "And you did it anyway." I looked back at the pond, the koi still circling like nothing had changed, but everything had. "I don't know what happens next," I admitted. Megan nudged me. "You don't have to. But I think a lot of people are watching now, and not for the reasons you're used to." For the first time that night, I smiled, and it felt real. 2 days after the wedding, the house smelled like fried catfish and judgment. Mom had insisted on hosting a family dinner to bring everyone back together, something about healing and normalcy. I knew better. This wasn't about celebration. It was a reckoning dressed in sweet tea and cornbread. The kitchen table looked the same as always, chipped edges, a faded floral tablecloth, and the same mismatched chairs we'd sat in since I was a kid. But everything else had shifted. Wade and Megan sat at one end, newlywed glow dimmed but still warm. Mom floated between the stove and the table, setting out bowls and smiling too much. Rick, at the head as always, looked like a man who'd been rehearsing a speech for 2 days straight. I sat where I always had, across from Wade, 1 seat down from Rick. Only this time I wasn't silent, not anymore. Dinner started quiet. Small talk about the weather, Megan complimenting Mom's coleslaw, Wade mentioning a co-op shipment delay. But Rick, he wasn't here for coleslaw. His fork clinked against his plate as he cleared his throat. Loud, intentional. "I've been thinking," he said, looking straight at me. "And it's time we put an end to this confusion." I set my glass down. "You've made your point," he continued. "Had your little moment. But now it's done. This startup fantasy ends now. Your place is here." Wade looked up, brows furrowing. Megan froze mid-bite. "My place?" I asked. Rick nodded firm. "You've had your fun, but this family's future is in the land, always has been. You're needed in the barn, in the fields where real work happens, not chasing computers and imaginary dollars." I laughed once, low and sharp. "1 million in revenue isn't imaginary. That number means nothing without this farm keeping you fed. Without me keeping a roof over your head all these years. So you think I owe you," I said flatly. Rick slammed his palm on the table, making the silverware jump. "I think you forgot who you are. You're not some CEO, you're a Keen, and Keens don't abandon their land." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't respond because Wade did. He set his fork down slowly, then pushed back his chair and stood. "No, Dad," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "She is a CEO. And she didn't abandon anything. She built something without your help. She carried this place on her back while you looked the other way." Rick stared at him, stunned. "I watched her do more work than both of us combined," Wade went on. "And you dismissed her like she was nothing, like she didn't count because she wasn't a son." "Wade," Rick started, but he raised a hand to stop him. "I'm done pretending she's just the helper. I want to learn from her, not from you." Rick blinked, visibly recoiling. "You want to what?" Wade's eyes were clear. "I want to understand what she's building, because that's the future, not stubbornness, not pride, her." The room held its breath. Rick looked to Mom, but she was still, lips pressed tight. Megan reached under the table and squeezed Wade's hand. "And me, I didn't say a word, because for once I didn't have to." Rick didn't speak for a long moment. The only sound in the kitchen was the low tick of the wall clock and the fizz of a soda can left half open near Wade's plate. You could feel the air shift, thicker, quieter. Even the light seemed to flatten, like it knew what was about to fall. "You want her to teach you," Rick said finally, low and dangerous. "You'd trade your own father for that." Wade didn't flinch. "I'm not trading anything. I'm choosing to learn from someone who actually sees where things are going." Rick sat back like Wade had struck him. "So that's it, one flashy announcement and you've turned your back on everything I've built." Megan's voice was quiet but firm. "You built a farm. Joanna built a system that could save hundreds of them." Rick scoffed. "You think software replaces sweat? You think a screen knows more than generations of calluses?" "No," I said, speaking for the first time since the tension detonated. My voice was even, calm, unapologetic. "But software can track how your feed costs doubled in 4 years. It can warn you when your margins are about to collapse. It doesn't replace sweat, Rick, it makes it count." He narrowed his eyes at me. "You always were a smart mouth." "No," I said again. "I've always been quiet, you just weren't listening." Rick's hand curled into a fist on the table, but the rest of him sagged just slightly. Like the weight of the room was finally pressing down on him the way it had pressed on me for years. Then Wade turned toward me fully. "I want in," he said simply. "Not just to use CropSync. I want to implement it across our entire operation, and I want you to mentor me through it." My chest tightened. "You're serious," I said. Wade nodded. "Dead serious. Megan and I talked. We're done waiting for the future to arrive on its own. We want to build it with you." Rick leaned forward, voice ragged now. "This is betrayal, plain and simple." "No," I said, standing slowly, not out of anger, but out of certainty. "This is the first honest harvest this family's had." The room stilled. Mom's fork clinked gently against her plate, but she didn't move. Megan had tears in her eyes, but she didn't blink. Wade stood tall beside her, unshaken, and Rick looked around the table like a man waking up in a house he no longer recognized. He opened his mouth, closed it again. Searched for something, authority maybe. Legacy. The weight he used to swing like a hammer, but none of it was there anymore. Because no one was afraid of him now. The silence didn't feel tense anymore. It felt free, not because we shouted him down, but because we'd simply stepped past him, and he didn't know how to follow. The fields looked different in late September. Maybe it was just the light, how it poured sideways through the stalks like melted gold. Or maybe it was the quiet. No machines, no barking orders, just the rhythmic crunch of boots on dry dirt and the hum of crickets coming alive with the evening. Wade and I walked side by side along the edge of the soybean field, a tablet in his hand, dust on his jeans, but a new kind of focus behind his eyes. I had a printout rolled up under my arm, updated efficiency charts from our latest CropSync run. He stopped halfway to the water tanks and pointed toward the tree line. "We lose time refueling from that angle," he said. "If we reroute through the north shed, it cuts almost 40 minutes a day." I smiled. "Funny. That's exactly what the data flagged." He grinned. "Guess the software's catching up to me." I elbowed him. "Or maybe you're finally catching up to it." He laughed, the sound softer than it used to be, less performative, more real. He didn't puff his chest as much now. Didn't need to. Something in him had settled like soil after rain. We kept walking, the breeze carrying the scent of cut hay and something sweeter, freedom maybe. Behind us, the porch light clicked on as the sun dipped lower. Megan sat in the porch swing, slow and gentle, the baby cradled in her arms. Her voice floated across the yard, humming a lullaby without words. Wade turned toward the sound, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he said, "Feels like we're building something different now." I looked out across the fields, same soil, same land, but everything felt new. "Because we are," I said. He glanced at me, his voice low. "You could have left, Joe, after everything. You had every reason." I almost did. "But you stayed." I let that settle for a moment. "Not for Dad, not for tradition." Wade nodded. "Then why?" I watched the baby's tiny arm reach upward in the fading light, catching nothing and everything at once. "For the future," I said. "The one we were never handed, but maybe we can hand down." We stood in silence, watching the horizon stretch into possibility. Wade's voice was quiet when he spoke again. "We'll make it better this time." I turned to him, my voice steady. "Together." And for the first time, I didn't feel like the helper. I felt like a partner, a builder, a woman whose roots had grown deep, not just in spite of the past, but because of it. The restaurant was small, tucked into the corner of Main Street where the old hardware store used to be. Exposed brick walls, mismatched chairs, mason jar lights overhead, farmhouse chic done right. The kind of place where they knew your name before you walked in and the menu changed daily depending on what the co-op delivered that morning. We debooked the long table in the back, beneath a wall of framed black and white photos of local farms. I recognized 3 from our own county. One was ours. I remembered the day Mom took it, me and Wade barely out of grade school, both grinning with gap-toothed pride, Rick behind us holding the reins of the old mule, looking like a man carved out of bark. Now the same man sat 2 seats down from me, quieter than I'd ever seen him in public. Rick wore a clean flannel shirt, sleeves buttoned all the way down. He hadn't spoken much since we arrived, aside from a tight-lipped "thank you" to the waitress. But he hadn't stormed out, hadn't refused the invitation. That alone was a start. Wade sat beside him, baby carrier at his feet, glancing down every few minutes with the kind of awe new fathers never really shake off. Megan was across from me, her hair pulled back, cheeks still glowing from sleep deprivation and something deeper, satisfaction maybe. A woman who had made the right choice and knew it. Mom was at the end, chatting with the hostess about rhubarb pie like nothing had changed, but everything had. Dinner was warm and familiar, heirloom tomato salad, skillet cornbread, pork loin so tender it barely needed a knife. The laughter was real this time. No tight wires strung beneath it. When dessert came, caramel cobbler with a pecan crumble crust, I stood and raised my glass. Everyone looked up, even Rick. "I don't make speeches," I said, grinning. That's always been Wade's department. A few chuckles circled the table. "But tonight," I went on, "I want to toast someone who changed more than her last name last week." Megan raised an eyebrow, playful and curious. "To Megan," I said, "who brought life and light into this family. You didn't just marry in. You opened windows. You asked questions no one else dared. You saw things others ignored. And you reminded me that silence isn't strength, speaking up is." Megan blinked fast and reached for my hand across the table. "Thank you," she whispered. I smiled, and as our fingers touched, the silver bracelet on my wrist caught the light. Just subtle enough to go unnoticed except for the tiny charm hanging from the chain. A circle, etched with one word, crop sync, not flashy, not loud. But mine. Wade raised his glass next. "To Joanna," he said, voice proud and sure, "who showed us that growth doesn't always come from the ground. Sometimes it comes from standing tall." And for the first time in my life, my father didn't interrupt. He just lifted his glass and gave me a single nod. No speech. No praise. But no argument either. Maybe he was starting to see me. Or maybe he just realized I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I looked around the table. The faces I'd known forever, the new ones that had changed everything, the baby sleeping softly beneath the hum of conversation, and felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Not the kind you wait for. The kind you build yourself, because justice doesn't always come fast. Sometimes it grows, slowly, quietly, but it roots deep. And once it does, it holds.